After such a fulsome introduction, no pressure, and equally following the previous speaker, no pressure. I'm reminded that the speakers at these conferences each of them has a different purpose, and consequently that affects the way that they present. And my job here again today is to talk about some books that for the early years, S1 to 3, for the broad general education in secondary school, that you might not have come across. And so I have got quite I'm giving you probably more detailed information than the previous speaker, but it's for a different purpose. So the books I've selected for the presentation this year, and hang on, I should actually start the presentation, I suppose, if I can go back the way. So, sorry about this. Yay, they are actually there. That's always a good start. So the books that I'm going to talk about today are all coincidentally debut novels for the writers. Two of the titles were actually selected by fellow members of the Education Committee because they had used them with success in the classroom, and the third was my own choice. The novels are Farewell Tour of a Terminal Optimist by John Young, which was published in 2017. The Girl Who Lost Her Shadow by Emily Eilert, which was published in 2019. And A Kind of Spark by Ellie McNichol, published in 2020. So they're all relatively recent novels. These novels have certain things in common. I've mentioned already they are all debut novels by these authors. They've all won prizes, some of them multiple prizes, and they're all about difficult and challenging themes. Just the thing you need for a dreich wet Saturday. I don't know if any of you saw earlier on this week on Tuesday a piece in The Guardian by Ian McEwan talking about the use of sensitivity readers prior to publication, looking for offensive material in manuscripts. Ian is not a fan of same. However, he's been taken to task by other writers. The only reason I mention this is because I feel in the current climate that I have to almost give a kind of trigger warning for the subject matter of today's books, which deal with, respectively, teenage cancer, clinical depression, and neurodiversity, amongst other things. Having said that, these are all topics that, to some extent, tick relevant boxes in our classrooms, dealing with diverse texts covering challenging subjects. I should hasten to say, though, lest you feel the need for a sudden sharp exit, that the book about the teenage cancer sufferer is really very funny at times. So please don't feel that you are going to be in for a completely bleak session. The central protagonists of these books are a 15-year-old boy and an 11 and 12-year-old girl, respectively. Both of those girls have older siblings into the 17 teen years, and thus the appeal is fairly wide-ranging. The Scottishness of these three books, these novels, is much less tenuous than the previous books that I did a few years back. Two of the three authors are Scottish-born. One is now working in London. The third is a Northern Irish person who is now living and working in Edinburgh. And all three books are set in Scotland. One set in Stornoway and involving a journey to Shotts, about more of which later. The second is set on an unnamed Scottish island, clearly meant to be one of the Orkney or Shetland Islands. And the third is set in a village just outside Edinburgh. As I did in the previous presentation, I've decided to tackle these in chronological order by publication date. And And as before, my difficulty has been to distill these down to bite-sized chunks to give you sufficient detail and flavour to decide if these are books that you would like to use in the classroom. So if we start with a farewell tour of a terminal optimist, and there is a really nice play on words because his mother actually describes him as an eternal optimist, but of course he also has terminal cancer, so there's the nice play on words there. John Young is a writer who was originally from Belfast and now lives near Edinburgh. He's a former lawyer, and he helped found something called the Teapot Trust, which is a children's art therapy charity, with his wife, Laura. He was a Scottish Book Trust New Writer Award winner in 2013, and the book won the Scottish Teenage Book Prize in 2019 and was also longlisted for the Branford Bowes Award in 2018. Young began writing when his daughter became seriously ill, and I have to say, sadly, subsequently died. And he says he found the act of escaping into another world to be cathartic because it took him away from her suffering and the tedium of the hospital ward. He says, "This is the magic of stories and books. They take us to other places, let us experience new emotions, live new lives, and forget our troubles." Now, I would suggest that we as a cohort of English teachers kind of all know that. And part of what we are trying to do is to get our kids to believe that. So it's really important that we actually think about that. So Conor Lambert is the 15-year-old central protagonist, and he comes from a very severely damaged family. I played around with words for that family: fractured, damaged, non-functional, all kinds of words. There's not a good fit actually there, because it's just Conor and his mum at this point, because his father's in jail for most of the book, and his sister was knocked down and killed previous years before the events in the novel. But both of these characters have a significant importance to the plot as it transpires. Conor is an undersized kid who has a caliper on his leg, and he is, of course, a prime target for bullies. The novel opens with a really, it's got one of these kind of explosive openings, where we're taken really close to the action at an early stage. And he is retaliating against his chief tormentor, a young man named Skates, his nickname, whom Conor describes as a head case. He's retaliating against his constant attacks, where he kicks out his right leg, the leg with the caliper on it, and Conor ends up on the floor. Conor awaits his chance and surreptitiously puts a dead bird in Skates' lunch. And instead of leaving the scene of the crime to kind of make good his escape, he hangs around to see the effects and inevitably gets chased by the bully. And so begins a series of misadventures that drive the plot of the novel. Now, having managed to get away from Skates on the Friday, he's got the weekend to kind of get over it. When he comes back to school on the Monday, his first class is physics. He doesn't think that Skates normally dogs physics. He's not normally there. And so he assumes that he's perfectly safe. But lo and behold, Skates arrives in the physics class. And Conor is a marked man. And during the course of this lesson, Skates literally needles him into an outright brawl. And by doing that, I say he takes a compass and he jabs his bottom all the time. Of course, he then does, and eventually gets to the point where Conor loses it and retaliates himself. So it results in an outright brawl, which results in both boys ending up in the hospital in Inverness. Now, when you consider that they're on Stornoway, and that involves a flight to the hospital in Inverness, it's quite a big deal. And subsequently, they are taken into temporary care following a children's panel hearing, because in the intervening period, Connor's mum has been taken into hospital following a breakdown, and it's discovered that Skates has actually been looking after himself for some time since his mum disappeared off to live elsewhere. Forming a very, and initially it seems impossible, friendship, an unlikely friendship, with the fellow juvenile delinquent Skates, the pair stage a breakout and set off on a crazy route across Scotland to find Connor's dad, an inmate at Shotts prison, hence the journey to Shotts. Despite his father having been in prison for the last 9 years, Connor's mum has never allowed him to visit. At first, he was considered too young, and then it was because his mother told him that it was to protect his father's dignity and pride. Skates, however, considers it essential that Connor be allowed to visit his dad, and suggests that they take the opportunity of their escape to travel to Shotts prison. However, as you do, they've got no money, and they don't know how they're going to get to where they're going. They're on the lam because they're being chased by, the authorities. And so in an effort to recoup some of his own money that Skates had, that was actually stolen by 2 other thugs, he then steals back some of their ill-gotten gains, and they become targets of the thugs. So as well as the authorities, they've now got the thugs chasing them, and subsequently end up with the police chasing them as well. So it becomes a bit like a kind of almost like a Keystone Cops thing at the beginning. They escape from the island on a fishing boat, and they land at Ullapool, and begin to journey to Shotts with little in the way of resources, and hunted by baddies and police alike. They dodge the police, there's joyriding and extreme partying. If Connor's dying, he thinks he might as well enjoy one last wild adventure. There's only one problem though, well, one among the many problems, I suppose, that Connor has left 2 things behind that are very important to him: the medication he needs to keep alive, and a girl who makes his life bearable. Their journey takes them to Inverness, Aviemore, Perth, Edinburgh, to Shotts, on buses, in stolen cars, at one point using a liberated shopping trolley as a carrier for Connor. And on the way, this unlikely friendship between the 2 boys builds, with Skates strangely empowering Connor to try things that he would never, ever ordinarily do. Climbing walls well above his height tolerance. He absolutely hates heights, but he does it. Shinnying up a lamppost. He didn't think it was possible to do. Going skiing in rented / borrowed clothes with no training, and going up in a ski lift. That is an absolutely hysterical description. Camping in the middle of a roundabout, as you do. Pulling survivors from a major car road crash. Illegally entering a nightclub. Joyriding, and that's where the extreme partying comes in. All the while, he's battling growing symptoms without his essential medications. It hardly sounds like a blast in the kind of what we say, had a blast, but the extremes encountered by Connor and the amazement that he finds at his own outside the box experiences and bouts of extreme laughter engender similar responses in the reader. The journey to the prison comes to an anticlimactic end when Connor discovers his father has been released from prison the day before he gets there. And I'm not going to tell you the circumstances of that because that's kind of an essential plot twist, and I need to leave you with something to make you read the book. And then, of course, there's his inevitable collapse. And he's taken back to hospital, and then finally with a reunion with his family, and facing the inevitable impact on disease of his unmedicated journey. I was really interested in listening to the previous presentation about the facing of consequences, and that is absolutely beautifully managed in this book, and without overtly saying so. The ending of the book revisits his relationship with Skates when the link between Connor's father's prison sentence and Skates' absent father comes to light. And it then results in challenging the relationships that have been built up between all the characters. The book deals with some very serious issues in a humorous way. It touches on bullying, freedom, care, control, friendship, as well as the specific and terrible prospects facing Connor, illness and possible death. Connor's method of dealing with illness is to say, now I apologise for my excruciating Spanish here, I don't speak Spanish, but it is nadie deja este mundo vivo, which means no one leaves this world alive. But that bravado may not work for everyone. And I suppose when I go back to what I was saying about your trigger warning, you need to think about who you might have in your class, either pupils themselves or family members. You'll need to know your kids well before you do any of these books, I would suggest. So it's a bravado that may not work for everyone. The author considers it vital to try to find a way of accepting a situation, even though it's tremendously brave, and it's a tremendously brave and difficult thing to do, to say, this is where I am, and I will make the best of it. Now, activity and creativity are great methods of increasing positive feelings, and these feature heavily within the novel. While this is and I've used inverted commas here, a cancer book, it does have bullies and irresponsible behaviour, but it also has charm and fun and happiness to offer the reader. Music also features heavily within the book, and one other interesting and useful additional link that you'll find in the book itself is a Spotify playlist, which gives you all the songs that are mentioned within the novel, and these are songs that have inspired Connor and Skates, and indeed the author, Young himself. And I know that that's something that will speak to a lot of the kids in your class, and so it might be a good one to have as a possible link. Moving on to the girl who lost her shadow. Now, this one is my choice, and I'll explain why in a minute. Now, Emily Eilert studied at Glasgow School of Art and the University of Glasgow, and she now works at the Glasgow Women's Library. She was awarded the Mary Hedderwick Writing for Children bursary from Moniac Moore in 2015, and she was children's writer in residence at the Wigton Book Festival also in 2015. The Girl Who Lost Her Shadow is her first novel, and it won the Kelpies Book Prize in 2017. Now, I have been struggling with this because the publication date of the book is 2019, but she was awarded the prize in 2017. So I can only assume that this is an internal prize within the Kelpies Publishing House, and that was done pre-publication. So otherwise, there's no logic there. So that's it. This was my personal choice, as I've said, within this group of text, and I chose it for quite specific reasons. I liked the link with one of the great Scottish children's classics of Peter Pan, whose loss of his shadow got him into all sorts of troubles and adventures. I liked that the central protagonist was a girl with a sister, and I particularly liked the magical realism of the book. It also fits in with the themes of the books that I have chosen to discuss today. Eilert herself, when discussing the motivation for this book, says, quote, "One of the things I like most about writing is how it changes the way you see the world around you. When I first started thinking about the girl who lost her shadow, I found myself watching shadows all the time. My own shadow, the shadows of people around me, shadows of trees, of clouds, of birds. I became curious about what happened when you jumped up or moved around a flame and show how shadows grow and shift and flutter." And I think, as with all of the books that I am mentioning, we can all sit here and see the obvious interdisciplinary links with the books that we are reading, because this links with your art department, perhaps with your drama department, all kinds of ways that you can actually use this as a stimulus text. In Eilert's ethereal fantasy, a 12-year-old girl on a Scottish island learns that she's braver and stronger than she thinks. And although I haven't actually included this in my sort of script for this, it is worth mentioning that because of one chance comment made about Gail's grandmother, we discover that she comes from Jamaica. And so it transpires that Gail and her mum and her sister all have brown faces, and the other characters in the story have white faces. But there's not a great deal made of it, but it means that you're also kind of incorporating within the book those kinds of diversities as well. Gail and her older sister Kay once longed to be marine biologists. Swimming and sharing secrets, they were bound by their fascination with the sea. On the morning of her 12th birthday at breakfast, Gail watches her shadow slip out under the door. Upstairs, her sister Kay has become listless and depressed since their dad left, always staying in her room. Kay used to be Gail's dependable, constant companion, but now she doesn't seem to care about anything or anyone anymore. During an argument that morning intended to try and gee her sister up, which fails miserably, Gail is horrified to see Kay's shadow slip away too, and feels it's her fault. Determined to get her sister's shadow back, whatever it takes, she finds herself led on a dangerous journey into nearby caves filled with dark tunnels where people have been known to disappear for days. Determined to make things right, Gail literally begins chasing shadows. The story is set in a place that feels familiar, yet is sometimes mythical. Her adventures take her to unexpected places, and Gail discovers that where there are shadows, there's darkness, and she's not the only one who's looking for something that's missing. The author paints a clear picture with her words, taking us through cramped tunnels or battling through raging seas. She's befriended by a character called Mirren, whom she encounters by accident in the caves, who informs her, quote, that people lose their shadows because they lose themselves, end quote. And that is so closely relevant to Gail's sister and how she feels about Kay currently. Gail also learns that Mirren's brother Francis is a shadow collector. And so begins a chase that spans cinematic terrain, from a tunnelling cave network to lochs and woods, drawn with enough mystery to fascinate the reader. Between Francis's homemade shadow-swallowing contraption and storms that manifest in human-like forms, the story is an unusual and effective allegory for how vulnerable and disorientating mental illness can be. Francis's anguished reason for wanting to catch shadows complicates the ideas of who's bad. For example, Gail's chasing her sister's shadow, but Francis is chasing it as well because he wants to collect it. So they become competitors for the same shadow. And that lends a sense of urgency almost to the chase. But Gail's determination to pursue this teaches her a lot about herself, including that it's normal to make mistakes. There are side strands regarding pearl thieves and a whale rescue that hint at environmentalism, but these are subservient to the main fabric of the novel. This book focuses on the challenges that we face when we experience loss. Now, the loss in this case is not the loss of bereavement, but it's the loss of an absent father, and it's the loss of the personality of her sister and what she's been used to. It's a tale of becoming. It's full of twists and turns, enough to keep the reader turning the pages. And it's centred around the main character of Gail and her journey. It's one of courage and self-discovery, and throughout you actually are rooting for her to become the heroine that the reader knows she can be. It focuses on elements of sorrow and feeling of being lost, but it also covers hope, bravery, and friendship. In terms of interdisciplinary learning, sections could be used in terms of health and well-being when considering issues like resilience and self-belief. It touches on considerations of ecology and the environment, which would link very well with science and geography or other kind of environmental topics. The intense and repeated oceanic imagery results in an arresting story. Trapped as Kay is in her own mind, her influence and passion are always felt. And that's what I liked about the book, the fact that Kay is in the midst of this real depression, but she is still a well-drawn character with influence on the characters within the story. Though it's no surprise that the shadows reunite with the sisters, the book's finale is a warm return from home from an unusual quest. It's artistic, it's moving, and it's a love letter to sisterhood and the sea. It's a lyrical, immersive, luminous tale of sisterhood, and it tells of bravery, the power of friendship, and being strong enough to ask for help when we really need it. Now, again, I go back to this notion about knowing your class, knowing who's in front of you, and knowing who this book will appeal to, speak to. But like the next book I'm going to talk about, I think it shows us a picture of those suffering from depression that those who are not suffering from depression can relate to and can help us to sort of see and feel how they feel. The final book I'm going to talk about is A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol, and it's probably the one of the three that you are most likely to know and have heard of. McNichol is a best-selling and award-winning Scottish children's author. It's, again, her debut novel, and it won the Blue Peter Book Award and the Waterstones Children's Prize in different years. You'll notice it was published, it was the Blackwell's Book of the Year in 2020, it won the Blue Peter Book Award in 2021, and then the two Waterstones Prizes also in 2021. So she had a good year that year with prizes. She is also the co-writer of, because again, hardly surprising, it was picked up as a gift for a TV series. And Elle McNichol is a co-writer for the TV series. And she is also neurodivergent herself. She is, I spoke to someone who has worked with her recently, and she describes her as feisty. I think that's a good description for her. She's an advocate for better representation of neurodiversity and disability in publishing and in the media. And she has founded something called the Adrian Prize to recognise children's fiction that explores the disability experience. She currently lives in North London, and she has been, as I've said, a very outspoken advocate for the representation of neurodiversity. This is a first-person narrative of the difficulties encountered by the central character, Addie, and they are immediate and in your face. And I think the first-person narrative works especially well because the readers are in Addie's shoes, and she writes it extraordinarily well, and you can't help feeling and identifying with Addie. Addie spends her lunchtime in Mr. Allison's library reading shark books. She makes sure her brown bread, chicken and mayo sandwiches don't leave marks. The nice little details of the kind of particular behaviours that make Addie feel secure are nicely laid down in front of us. However, in Miss Murphy's classroom, Addie's handwriting is, quote, "It's like a baby's," end quote. And her story is torn apart, literally and in front of her face. And it takes every cell within Addie's body to prevent her from melting down. Now, if I have one criticism, I suppose it is about the depiction of the class teacher. I understand that it is done as a literary device. I understand that it's a representation of a teacher of 30 plus years experience. But my fellow colleagues, I know lots of teachers of 30 plus experience who would never treat a child in that way. And so while it is a great device within the book, I find myself as a teacher educator shouting at the book and saying, we're not like that anymore. Now, as I say, McNichol has said that she has written about experiences that she herself has had. So I take it as being true that at some point in her life that has happened to her. Addie is autistic, and there's a great deal made about the correct phraseology. She doesn't have autism. She is autistic. It's quite a specific thing. Yet Miss Murphy does not seek to understand her. But then again, Miss Murphy treated Keedy, Addie's older sister, mercilessly. Now, Keedy is a twin. Keedy is in her first year at university. And the interesting dynamic in this book is that there are twins, one of whom is autistic and the other is not. So you've got Nina, the only non-autistic child in the family. And that places her in an interesting and challenging position too. But Keedy is Addie's lifeline. She's also autistic, and she explains things to Addie that she cannot control or explain herself. Yet she too seems to be fading as she works hard to fit into university. Meanwhile, Nina, Keedy's twin, the only sister not autistic, is suddenly inviting Addie to feature in her vlogging tutorials. And Addie is puzzled by this change. So we've got social media appearing here. This girl, Nina, has her own channel, and she vlogs about makeup and how to do makeup. And that's how she spends her entire day. And she's never included Addie up until this point, but then suddenly Addie's invited in to be part of her vlog. it's very interesting, the reaction to the vlog and the comments. And latterly, Nina takes down the comments, certainly. But Addie actually managed to root around and find, you know how you never actually completely lose anything on the internet? Well, she comes across them, and they are extraordinarily hurtful comments. However, Miss Murphy introduces witches as the class's latest subject, something that sparks in Addie. This is introduced as a fun new project to study in the run-up to Halloween. And as the teacher recounts how 16th century women were accused of witchcraft for reasons as innocuous as being left-handed, Addie is left stunned. She's horrified that innocent people, including women from her own Scottish village, I'm sorry, I'm watching my time here, were persecuted, executed, and then forgotten by society. The revelation leaves her determined to lobby for a local memorial in her Scottish village. Oppression of those with perceived differences, of course, not confined to the history books. Addie herself experiences this at first hand in various forms, both at school and in her local community. But she doesn't sit back to accept injustice. And with support from a new girl at school, she fights valiantly for what she knows is right. Could it be that these women, misunderstood by their community and condemned to torture, symbolise the feelings that she has in school through her friendships? Suddenly, she's studying this history keenly, supported by her new friend, Audrey, and working through Miss Murphy's and her classmates' reaction. Thereafter, Addie determines the witches deserve an apology, a public plaque, a statement of recognition, and with her family's support, she petitions the village council for this memorial multiple times, taking all her courage and setting herself up for some fairly brutal reactions from the adults in the village. This becomes Addie's cause célèbre and a symbol of her own struggle to be understood and accepted. And just in case you think that witchcraft is a kind of passé topic, you might be interested to know that last month the Royal Society of Edinburgh, the Royal Society of Scotland hosted as part of its summer series an event called Witches of Scotland, Who They Are and Why Do Their Stories Matter. And you can still actually get the online version of that at the moment. So Addie researches and identifies closely with some of the women that she researches. Where events overtake them and the women become helpless and voiceless. And this is most powerfully articulated when Addie is placed in a similar situation when her prized possession, a thesaurus gifted to her by Keedy, is torn apart and defaced with an epithet. The word retard is written over her sister's dedication, while all the other classmates watch without intervention except Audrey. Understandably, Addie reacts, and a bit like Connor in the first book, she physically attacks. Teachers arriving after the start of the incident react and judge without knowing or finding out about the context. And in Miss Murphy's case, leaping to the wrong conclusions. And it's only when Nina and Keedy arrive at the school do the facts and Addie's experiences come to light. McCall offers an utterly convincing, hugely likeable narrative voice, challenging many a myth and stereotype, but never actually forcing its message. It's a powerful book with a gentle touch. Addie's sister is also on the spectrum, and we're reminded that there are many different ways to be autistic. We see that there are regrettably also many ways to be ignorant and unpleasant, and that even adults can be bullies. And we're reminded what a phony place the world of social media can be. We can, however, revel in joining Addie in her crusade for equality and truth. Reviewers have called the book earnest and perceptive, noting the bullying Addie endures will leave readers' stomachs in sympathetic knots. Others have applauded the representation of Addie's autism, saying it is portrayed with clarity, and her neurological reality is represented properly, the interpersonal bonds that she has and the thoughtful reflections. She writes Addie with power and determination, and this is what I particular light. It's especially strong at revealing the sheer labour required for Addie to negotiate the world and the toll it takes, which is evident in Keedy as well. This is an aspect of the book that's particularly well done. Nicola says she does not write about things that have not happened to her, and this comes across authentically. Whether they're facing similar neurodivergent challenges or not, readers will appreciate and perhaps empathise with Addie's honesty, and they may follow her lead in reconsidering history as a topic. I've gone over my time, I apologise. Thank you very much indeed.